everyone. Welcome to my panel. We're going to be talking about the optimizing your workflow. I'll explain what that exactly means in a second, but I just want to say thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate your time. And it's my first time at LightBox, so super exciting. It's super exciting to see some really familiar faces that I haven't seen in a while, so thank you guys for coming. So my name is Jose. I'll talk a little bit about my background in a second, but I want to explain why I want to talk about this. I think what this means is really I'm really gonna try to explain how my workflow as a concept artist works. Why I think is probably one of the most important things that you can work on as you work your way through the art community and your career, and how it has benefited me as a concept artist. I've been doing concept art for over 12 years now, and again, I think this is one of the most crucial things that has allowed me to do all the things that I have done in the past decade or so. And so let's get started. So again, my name is Jose Vega. Currently, my full-time job is I work at Wizards of the Coast for Magic the Gathering. We have a very small concept art team. We're 4 artists, 2 senior. I'm one of the seniors. I deal with all the environment side of things, and the other senior artist works with the character side of things, and we also have 2 junior artists. And pretty much my job is develop all the environments and designs that the illustrators are going to use for the actual illustrations in the card. So we spend probably from 3 to 6 weeks per set that's going to come out in the next couple years. And that's when we get to design all the lands, all the specifics of the characters, the creatures, and all that stuff. And so we create a huge Bible, we call that world guide, and that's what we sent to the illustrators for them to use for the actual cards that you see in the game. And so my job is, or the artwork that I do is, the audience is actually artists, it's not regular players. And so that's one important thing that I have to keep in mind when I'm doing the artwork, that my audience is going to be the artist, not the actual audience. And that's super important. But this is just some examples of some of my favorite sets that I've worked in the past years. I've been with them for a little bit, almost 4 years now in January. And of course, I gotta show my 2 beautiful dogs. This is Rain, and she's 2 years old, and this is Layla. She's about a year, we don't know. Both of them are rescue, and they're my babies. Before that, you guys, we got some of the Castlevania crew here. That's why they're yelling like maniacs. But before that, I was the lead background designer for Castlevania Netflix from season 1 to 4. I was there for probably around 4 years as well, working, and part of the job there was just not doing the backgrounds. We were doing color scripts, we were doing layouts, everything from designing the backgrounds to making the actual final illustrations that you will see on the actual animation, everything in between, we were doing that. And also dealing with outsourcing companies, and that will help us with that section of the pipeline for the animation. Fun times, for sure. But it all started back in 2012. That's when my journey as a professional, quote unquote, concept artist started. This is some of the, jeez, I can't even look at that. These are some of the very early artwork that I did. This was actually this right here was my actually first ever illustration gig that I got for like a big, quote unquote, company. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because at the beginning, our goal pretty much at the end of the day is to live off our art, right? And that includes, money thing, right? And so this part of my life here, I started when I was in Puerto Rico. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. There's really not a huge industry there. So all my clients were from either the States or any other place in the world. But as a freelancer, you're always trying to have this battle of finding the next job and the next job and the next job, because you got to move from one job to the other as you finish, so you can earn that money, so you can actually make a living. And in this first 3 to 5 years, which is what I spent as a freelancer at the beginning, was sort of what ignited the desire for me to be as optimal as possible with my art. Because, and I'll give you a couple of examples here. This is some of the super early illustrations that I did for many different IPs: Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Warhammer, and some other IPs that we got here. But this is just a very simple example of my way of thinking back then. This was about 12 years ago again. So for example, if I was getting paid $200 in each illustration, which is super low, my mindset was like, okay, if I need to find or do this artwork for this particular level of quality that will be accepted as the final art, how many can I do, how many can I fit in the day or in the week or whatever the case? Because most times, if you're lucky enough, you will get the question of, oh, how many illustrations can you take for this amount of time or for this deadline? And so to me, it was like a very mathematical process. And so if I knew that I could do an illustration in 4 hours, that would mean that I would, get paid, $50 an hour for $200 per illustration, right? Or if it took me 8 hours or so, right? So that was sort of like my mentality at the beginning. And that's sort of like what started thinking of, okay, if I need to make this artwork, I need to know exactly how long it takes me, whatever that artwork is, and what pipeline I'm going to be using to be the most effective and optimal to create the artwork, right? And so some of you, or maybe most of you, might not be familiar with that aspect. I come from a background where I didn't do art when I was a little kid, right? So I don't have a very, this might sound weird, but I don't have a very emotional attachment to art. And so it was easier for me to sort of see it in that sort of like mechanical, mathematical way at the beginning. After that, I did a lot of Comic-Cons and cons that I went to. I did a lot of fan art. This is my fan art face that I did. Doing fan art I think, is a great idea, especially to attract certain clients, and we can talk more about that later if you do it the right way. But this is some of the artwork that I was doing back then in my Comic-Con days. And after that, I started getting more into the sort of the concept art, video game sort of production, sort of artwork that was needed. This one and this one were for Lord of the Rings mobile game. I think it's a mobile game. I don't remember the name. And this was for the Dungeons and Dragons handbook. I think the 3rd edition or 2nd edition or something like that, for the monks area. So those were pretty big accomplishments that I did during those first 5 years of freelance back when I was in Puerto Rico. I also got to work, this was more recent, for some other animation projects besides Castlevania. This was some of the work that I got hired for to do for the Batman animation. This was, I don't know if you guys saw the movie, this was like the last battle stage that Batman had. And I got to design the stage and some layouts and color scripts and all that. And this was my first movie work that I got to do. The reason why I'm showing you this is because whether you're working in the movie industry or animation or video game industry, there's certain, even though there's a lot of overlap with the skills, which I think if you're good enough, you can translate to one or the other. There are certain specific things that will work only on movies or will work only on animation or video games, right? So for example, on this was my first task that I did. I was still living in Puerto Rico for this, and I did probably over 50 different variations of this one prop. And the reason for that was because the first dozen of designs that I did, when the engineer, the person that was gonna actually build this thing for the actual movie, they look at the concept and they were like, we can't build this. It just doesn't work. They needed to fill it with water. They need to fit a person in there. and needed to have all this other mechanical system that my concept per se wasn't fitting those criteria. And so we went through a lot of iterations to try to make that work, but that wouldn't happen in video games or animation, because you can just put it in the computer and people can see it and you can make it work, right? But it was a great experience. And this was a little bit more recent, of course. This was done for the holiday special for Guardians of the Galaxy. I'll talk a little bit more about this process later on. But this was a great example of how, if you know your pipeline and you can have it optimized, how you can get a lot done in a little space when it's required. Also did some work for some live action series, Lioness. I think season 2 is coming out soon. And also The Resort for Pico Original. And also I got to work on some video games, designing the stages for multiverses. I actually got super early on this project. This was probably about 6 years ago. Back when I was actually in Castlevania working, that's when I started this. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. And also work with other companies. But the reason why I'm also showing you all this is because even though I've had a full-time job on a studio for the past 7-8 years, because of I know how my pipeline and workflow works, I can fit in certain things and certain gigs that I may get just because I understand the time it takes me to do something, right? Which I think is super important. I'm also running a course platform for concept artists as well, called The World Builders, and we are giving away a free tutorial. I did like a redesign of a very old piece, probably about 12, 15 years ago, and sort of redid it. So if you're interested, you can just go there, download the tutorial, and it's yours for free. You don't need to get anything. So that's all for you. And so why, right? So I think the root of this talk and this topic to me is because, time is your most valuable asset. I think that is true all throughout, not just in art, but also in your life as well. And I think if we figure out a way that we can use the most out of it, of course we're just talking about art right now, but if we make the most out of it, we can really accomplish a lot of things in less time that it requires us to do. I'm mainly going to concentrate on client work, right? So when we're doing personal work, we really don't have that rush for deadlines or schedule, right? You can still apply for personal work, but this is mostly, I really just want to concentrate on client work at the moment. And I want to give you four main reasons before I show you some examples. The first reason is going to be increase on productivity. Streamline processes, so by optimizing your workflow, you remove unnecessary steps and make the process more efficient, allowing you to complete tasks a lot faster. Now, you can also focus on art, which is a system, in place means more time that can be dedicated to the creative work. So I've been teaching for many years now, and one of the main common things or issues or questions that I get from students, especially younger artists or people that are starting out, is that sometimes they don't feel motivated, or they don't know how to start an idea, or if they have an idea, they don't know how to actually develop it, or if they develop an idea, they don't know how to finish it. And so I'm a strong believer that if you have a pipeline in place that takes you from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, you can forget about the inspiration part of it or the motivation part of it, and you can incorporate that process to get something from 0 to 100, right? I'll show you some examples of that in a second. Reason number 2 is better time management. This is another huge one, right? Deadlines met. If you work in the industry, deadlines and schedules are a huge thing because they're tied to budget and money. Optimize workflows help you better estimate how long tasks will take, making it easier to meet deadlines. Reduce procrastination, knowing exactly what to do next, reduces decision fatigue, and can help in staying focused. Reason number 2, enhance quality of work. So consistency is another huge thing, especially if you're showing your portfolio around. You need to show that you can do something at a quality consistently and improving. A well-defined workflow ensures that each project maintains a certain standard, resulting in higher overall quality. Attention to detail: by breaking down tasks, you can focus on finer details without feeling overwhelmed by the larger project. I use this a lot for time management, so I have a specific process that I don't want to say that I developed because I didn't invent it, but that I have sort of like tweaked throughout the years that I use, that I know it works 100% of the time with my time management, right? And so if I can use that and replicate that every single day, I know I'm going to get the same results that I'm looking for every day without worrying about if it's going to work or not. And number 4, again, no need for motivation or inspiration. I'm not saying that motivation or inspiration is a bad thing, right? But if we end up in a place where we depend on motivation or inspiration to do the work, it's going to be very risky when you get into the professional setting, because as a professional, you're not going to have that luxury, right? Because of deadlines, and you need to meet the standards and all that, right? And so we don't need to discard it. So whenever we have it, we use it. But whenever we don't have it, we have a system in place for us to do the actual work. With an established pipeline, you will know how to start, progress, and finish a project without the need of feeling motivated or inspired. Again, you can apply this mindset, right, for many different things. It's not just for art. I apply it to time management, and from creating ideas or coming up with ideas to developing ideas, and also to finish ideas. So to give you an example, for wizards, every I'll say 3 to 5 times a year, we have what we call a concept push, which is where we sit down as artists and we develop whatever set is going to come out. And we have about sometimes 3 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, and we have a huge list to develop ideas for. And so it is a setting where every single day we have to come up with something new that hasn't been done before in the world of magic, which is extremely hard because magic has been around forever. And so with a pipeline like this, I can, even though it may not be the greatest 100% most unique idea, I can develop something that maybe is 80, 90% there, which is going to be good enough. And as a teacher, I think one of the misconceptions that I think most younger artists see is like they always have to come up with the best idea ever every single time, which is a huge stress to put on themselves, but also is very unrealistic. And so a lot of times just 80% of that is good enough, right? And so understanding that with the pipeline in place, I think is a great help. So this is the mindset, this is what I have in my mind, right, as I'm thinking on every single task and every single project, right? I have my bag of tools, right? And this is just some examples of the tools that I normally use as a concept artist, right? So we have Blender. Blender, anybody? Yeah. All right. Photoshop, we got some VR. I mainly use Gravity Sketch, Quixel, and then some photos or photographic. Unsplash, which is a great site for free copyright images that you can use. 3D Code for sculpting, and then ShotDeck is great especially for reference for lighting, mood, cinematography, and that sort of thing. And the reason why I have this is if you take a look here, I have 1, 2, and 3, which do 3D overall, right? So Blender does 3D, VR does 3D, and 3D Code does 3D, but each one has its own strengths and tools that maybe are better suited for the specific task that you have, right? And so if I give you an example here, this is a very simple example. If I needed to create this architecture piece that I have a concept for, or somebody handed me a concept or anything, and I need to build it in 3D, right? I'm just not gonna think, oh, I'm gonna do everything in Blender. I'm gonna break it apart and say, okay, I know I can do this way faster in 3D Code because of the tools that 3D Code provides me. I know that I can get the bigger shape, cleaner base in Blender, so then I can do some kit bashing later on. And then maybe I need something quicker for big shapes and have multiple options for that particular building. And so maybe I can do that on Gravity Sketch, right? So I like to break things up into smaller pieces. One, because it's easier to digest and easier to tackle. Two, it's easier to put into my time block, as in my schedule for my time management. And also, there are just simply better tools on each one of these that will tackle each of these specific problems a little bit better than the other. Now, again, this is something that I have sort of developed and worked on through the years, right? You don't need to, I need to get this like right now. This is something that you're just gonna work on depending on what the needs are, right? But that should be sort of like the goal every time you're working on something. And so what I like to do is sort of like mix and match things, depending, again, on what the task is. I like to match, maybe I'll do something very quickly, and I'll show you some examples of this, very quickly in VR, so then I can take it into Blender for maybe texture and lighting, and then finish it in Photoshop for some photo batching or final details and presentation. But maybe there are some cases where I just deal with pictures only because I need something more sketchy, maybe more concept art-y type of thing, or they just need some paintings or something. Then maybe I just don't even do 3D and I just deal with the photo batch experience all the way through. Or maybe I need to do like a more detailed architectural call out because they need to see the detail of this particular thing. Then I'll go into building in 3D code, Blender, and then Photoshop. But these are some real life examples that I have done. So for Guardians of the Galaxy, when they came to me, they were really tight on a deadline. So they wanted something the next day and then the next day. And it was probably all about maybe like a week of work or a week in contact. And so their purpose or their need was they needed some inspiration for the people that were going to construct these vendors that were going to be seen on the street on the holiday special. They really didn't need it like specific details, how is it manufactured, or how is it like the specific design details of the actual vendor. They just needed like inspiration for it. And so once I knew that I didn't need it to go to like really detailed models or like super clean callouts or anything like that. I could do something rough where I could just showcase that piece of image and then get them some ideas on what they could do when they build it in real life. And so this was like I think the brief was like an electronics sort of vendor, and they also had already built in pieces that they were going to reuse from like a circus, I think. I think this was one of the carousel thingies that turn around, and so they were going to cut it out. And so they sent me pictures of it, and I just modeled it in VR, and then just did the concept there. And these are just some examples of that. And again, these are like super rough, so like if you really zoom in, you could really see all the imperfections, but it does serve the purpose. And so when a student asks me, or when somebody asks me, how do you know when your piece is done, right? How do you stop and then move on to the next? My number one thing is that I always think about the purpose of why I'm doing that image, and once that purpose is fulfilled, that's when I can stop, right? Yes, you can work it out for an extra day or something, but the purpose is already fulfilled, so you can spend that time extra in doing, something else, right? Now, again, that's for work stuff, not personal work, but there's some examples of that as well. This one here, I started actually in Blender because they wanted something a little bit tighter. And so they wanted more of a close-up of what they could build. And this one in particular, I started in Blender. And so you can see here some of the examples of the actual vendors and the speaker being used on the holiday special. I think this translated to the third movie as well. I think it started in Nowhere, the environment, but I can't recall. But as you can see, it's not exactly the same, right? But it's inspired by the artwork that I did, which is great. And so this is sort of like the streamline that I did. So this was the model from Gravity Sketch, right? And I mainly concentrated on faking quote-unquote detail, right? If you zoom into the models, and probably you can even see it there, there's really nothing that you can say, oh, this is a speaker, or this is like a console thing. It was mostly just to kind of, how can I give you the illusion of there's detail here without actually making the detail. And so that was the main purpose of the first stage here. This in Blender was just some really rough texturing, some emission lights, and just to create some lighting atmosphere there. And then in Photoshop, just finish it off for the final presentation for the art director. Oh boy, I might bring some nightmares here now. Scenario 2, this was, and they could attest to this. I'm gonna try not to make anything up. When we were working on Pasadena, I think it was end of season 2. This topic, this whole thing about the pipeline and understanding how long it takes something and how to get to a certain level of quality that was needed was crucial. And in season 2 at the end, I don't know if you guys saw the series, but at the end, there's this whole conversation between these two characters. And the environment, as you know, Carmilla, which is a lady character there, she's a vampire, so she cannot really stand in the light. This whole conversation happened from sunset to nighttime, and supposedly, right? But when we got all the backgrounds from the outsourced company, which they did back then, they would do like 85% of the backgrounds back then, and then we'll clean them up and fix them if we need it. But all the backgrounds that they did for this, and this was probably 60, 80 different backgrounds, they were all done in sunset. So you could see the problem why we couldn't have all those backgrounds in there, because then she will turn into ash, and it wouldn't work, right? And there's actually a shot of a transition from when the sun goes down and all that. So when we got this problem, back then we were starting to do, we actually hired very recently our first 3D artist for that production. And I was already doing some 3D, but this artist was mainly just doing all the 3D side of things. And so when we got these problems, it was part of my job to figure out how we were gonna fix it, because we couldn't send them back and say, oh, you gotta fix all these backgrounds, right? Because one, it was part on our fault because of the storyboards and some other production stuff, but number two, it was just gonna take longer for us to bring that back and then make them do it. And so, because I knew the pipeline from starting a model or doing a 3D kit, having some really light texture, doing a very simple lighting, and rendering that, and I know that would take me a certain amount of time, and taking that render into a final background that you see in the production, it would take me a certain amount of time. I could do the math on, okay, if I need 60, 80 backgrounds, how long it would take me to create this 3D kit that we built for this particular scene with the 3D artist, and then set up the cameras, make all these renders, and then hand them out to all the background artists. Part of my job was to figure out what that timeline was gonna look like. And it sort of worked in my head. I knew we could do it. And so I presented the idea to our director, Sam. And then he said, like, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And so we actually built this little town. Me and the 3D artist, we put some textures in, put the lighting, and so we were able to fix it. And we probably did that in like a few weeks. It was like crazy amount of work for a short, very period of time. But I think it was only able to do that because of that specific pipeline. If we were going to pick every single background and hand it to the artist, and then, okay, you got to turn this from, sunset to nighttime, it would have taken us probably 3-5 times the time. And so this is a specific scenario where that sort of mentality came into fruition and helped us a lot. Now, scenario number 3. Now, if you see my work, most of my work is more towards the more of like a realistic side of things. And when my buddy asked me to join this project and help them out with the concepts for the stages, they really wanted more of a stylized type of look, which I wasn't super familiar with it, since I always deal with PBR textures and the rendering and all that. And so at the beginning, it was a particularly challenging thing. This was the very first stage that I did, because I couldn't do my regular process of, yes, I'll make the models and then doing like regular PBR textures and then do a render and then paint over, because it wasn't the look that they wanted. And so I had to figure out a way that I could still do part of the process, but at the same time fulfill their needs for the final look that they wanted. And the way I did that was, I'll show you here. So this is like a extreme simplified version of it. If we take like a simple asset, for example, that I have a model with, right? Whether it's in VR, Blender, or whatever the software they use. The top section is my regular pipeline where I just do PBR texture, diffuse, you have normals, roughness, displacement, etc., right? And this is sort of like the goal of the final look, right? So a little bit more realistic in terms of the texture and the lighting. And in this case, you have most of your time, so if you take 0 when you start and 100 when you finish, most of your time is going to be spent on the 3D side of things and then a little bit on the Photoshop, which is very close to this, what happened here, right? A lot of 3D, but heavy work on the beginning side and then light work at the end. And what I did was I cut out some of the steps. So simple texturing, just color, no normal. So I wasn't using any normals on the texture, because normals, I don't know if you guys do 3D, you know, when you add normals, it adds that really noisy effect, which makes it a little bit more realistic, quote unquote. And then I would just add some variation, very simple variation on the color. And so that allowed me to spend less time in the 3D and then spend a little bit more time on the painting to get more of a stylized sort of look into this. Because if I were to go from here to here, I would spend way more time trying to clean up all the complexity of the realistic textures into the actual scene, right? And so this allowed me to almost create like a new pipeline for me, because this was the first time that I did it, for me to widen my pool of clients, right, for something more stylized, and allow me to create sort of like a different pipeline for this type of work. So, in conclusion, just 3 points. Try to be as optimal as an artist. You know, focus on what's really important. Do not limit yourself to one tool. Again, this is something that you are just gonna work on as, you know, in your journey as an artist. This is also a way for you to expand your pool in clients, right? So one thing that I always tell my students when they're very niche in their work is that you can be very niche in your work. Like, you could be as specific as possible in your work. You could be super, super unique, but you have to understand that then your pool of clients, if you want to live off your art, is going to get reduced by a lot. And so understanding that dynamic of how niche you are in terms of like your style and the artwork that you do, is gonna, in the market, is gonna reduce the pool of clients that you are going to attract. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be a environment artist, a character artist, a 3D artist, and all that. But you can pick one and then expand your skill set within that same niche, right? So you could be a great concept artist for environments, but you can also involve 3D in your process. I actually have gotten hired because of the 3D in my environments, because they wanted to use it for their studio, for their artists to play with the concepts that I made, right? So not only I got hired to do the actual design of the environments, but the tools that come within it, like the 3D, they could actually use it for their production and the other artists for them to play with. And so you can expand within your niche all these different skill sets to expand your pool of clients. So again, take some time to experiment with other tools, whether you end up using them or not. Make sure that you give them the chance, because you really never know the amount of opportunity that you can get from that. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I think it was probably before I started working in Pasadena, I had a very bad relationship with 3D, right? My first job when I got out of college was doing 3D visualization for an interior designer, and I was doing like hotels and houses and stuff like that. And I did that for like 4 years in Maya, which is ridiculous. Yes. And after that time, I got such a bad taste for 3D that I didn't want to touch it. And I didn't do concept art for a very long time. But when I started my journey to try to become a concept artist, I started when I was probably 25, 26, that journey. I really refused myself to touch any 3D. And after a couple of years, I started seeing artwork that I wanted to be able to do. I remember an artist called Ken Ferkla. I took a class with him, and the reason I took his class is because I like his work, and I like the work that he was doing, and I wanted to strive to do that type of work. And I saw how much 3D he used during the class that I took with him, that I had to reconcile that sort of bad taste that I have for 3D, and had to pretty much dismiss my feelings for it and understand that because I was using that tool, I was able to get to the next level of where I wanted to get, right? And so it's very important that you experiment with that. And then again, last reminder is just time is your most valuable asset in art and in life as well. So get the most out of it. So again, thank you guys for coming.